Well, across the Dakotas and Minnesota, we're going to have the heat, we're going to have the humidity, but will it be too warm for any showers and storms to develop across our region? We're going to break it down right now. Well, going into Thursday, we're going to see that we're going to have just a slight chance of some showers and maybe a few storms across North Dakota. Maybe in the morning a little bit, but I think the better chance is going to be a little bit later into the afternoon going into Thursday, particularly across that northeast, North Dakota, northwest Minnesota. Most of it's actually going to be up in Canada for Thursday, and then kind of tracking eastward, maybe a few showers lingering into the night. Now, as we get into late Thursday night, more so Friday morning, what we're going to have, and I'll break this down just a little bit more for you here in a bit, but we're going to have a low-level jet that sets up and pushes into South Dakota and Minnesota, and so we're expecting, actually we're fairly certain right now, we're going to be expecting some storms to develop across that region late into the night, early Friday morning, and track northeastward throughout Friday morning. Now, most of these, we're just looking at the general thunderstorm variety type, not really expecting much to be severe, if anything, maybe perhaps late in the morning, kind of in central parts of Minnesota. But as you can see here, we're already in the afternoon hours, and doesn't look, god damn it. 8 a.m., 5 a.m., what time was that? Now, what we're going to have developing late Thursday night, more so early Friday morning, is going to be these storms developing across South Dakota and Minnesota. We're actually going to have a low-level jet set up late in the night, Thursday night, early Friday morning. That's going to be developing these storms and pushing them off to the northeast on Friday morning. Now, we're just expecting these, for the most part, being showers and storms. Maybe there's an outside chance late morning, early afternoon that some of these into central Minnesota could be strong, maybe an isolated severe, but ultimately I think most of these are just going to be the rain and thunderstorms, and actually looking pretty good that chance is going to develop. Now, what could happen later in the day as these rain showers and thunderstorms move off to the northeast, that we're left with a little bit of an instability back to the south and west, and that's where you can see the Storms Prediction Center has this marginal risk, this 1 out of 5 chance for severe weather. And mostly, like I said, that's going to be later into the afternoon on Friday, just with some of that instability left over, that we might see a few storms redevelop later in the afternoon and into the evening hours and push to the northeast before the sun kind of sets and things kind of settle down a little bit more going into Friday evening. And so ultimately, that was kind of the quick version of what's expected going into the weekend. And really, that's kind of the best chance we have for seeing any types of showers and storms going into the weekend as well. But we're going to break it down just a little bit further for the remainder of the video. So here are those low-level winds going into Friday morning. You can see that 850 millibar jet right around 5,000 feet above the surface, just nosing into central parts of Minnesota, eastern portions of South Dakota. And as we take a look at the model, there you go. That's kind of where the storms want to develop here, at least on the European side of things. The European model really within that region, right on the nose of that jet is where we're expecting those storms to develop. And also at the mid-levels, we're seeing a mid-level wave that's also kind of pushing through and helping kick some of these storms off as well. Now, much like the last model we just looked at, as we get to around noon time frame on Friday, we see those storms quickly move off to the north and east. And you can basically see that developing both at the upper levels here. Here's that wave that I was showing you earlier, moving across northern parts of Minnesota. And then also at the low levels, that low-level wind, that jet actually weakens a little bit. We've got a little piece of it that's still pushing some of the storms into northern parts of Minnesota into the afternoon hours, and perhaps resetting the stage just a little bit for those of you down in the southern parts of Minnesota going into the afternoon. Now, as we get into Friday evening, we've got those dew points starting to rise and build up across southern parts of Minnesota. Of course, that means those cave values are going to be on the rise as well, as we're going to be getting into the 1500s to 2000 joules per kilogram. Once again, that's the amount of powder in the keg. Is the more powder we have, the more explosive these storms could become. But ultimately, what you need is a trigger to set these off. So now as we continue through the mid-levels and low levels as well, we see we do have a low-level jet that starts to set up once again going into the evening hours on Friday evening. At the mid-levels, we do have just a weak little trough that starts to swing through here, and my graph begins to look like John Madden here as I begin to write over the top of everything. And ultimately, what that could lead to, as I mentioned before, is just the possibility of some storms redeveloping down to the south and west, where we have that marginal risk, perhaps maybe just north of the Twin Cities. It's going to be close, folks. It might actually slide just a little bit further to the south and east and include the Twin Cities going into Friday evening. We'll have to keep an eye on that. There's a little closer look as we get right around that 9-10 o'clock time frame Friday night, and then going on into around midnight. We're probably going to see those storms continue. We're going to continue to see some high dew points across the region going into Friday night and early Saturday morning. We're also going to have just a little bit of a southwesterly low-level jet. Southwesterly is not the most optimum direction when we talk about a low-level jet and setting up these types of thunderstorms going into the overnight hours. But nevertheless, as we get a little bit deeper into the night, we're expecting those storms really to continue across southern Minnesota. Now, I think as we get deeper into the night, we're really not going to be concerned about the severe weather, especially as the sun goes down. But we do have a chance for those storms continuing into early Saturday morning. Now, as we get into Saturday, this is when things get just a little more interesting. We have this ridge that buckles and builds just a little bit more. And basically what we're going to have going on is that as that ridge just continues to just get stronger here, you can see the anomaly, the redness going on. And at the 850 millibar levels, just 5,000 feet above the ground, again, really, really warm temperatures begin to push in as this ridge develops, and we get all this warmer air buckling into the region. And as we get more so into the mid levels, this is kind of what we use sometimes just to determine capping. Capping is when the temperatures are so warm that it doesn't allow thunderstorms to develop. And a lot of times we kind of look for that 10 degrees Celsius line as kind of that magic number. Now, you might be able to use a little bit cooler number just because we are in fall. We're not going to warm up quite as much as we do, obviously, in the summer. So it won't take quite as much of a cap to hold things down. But nevertheless, we do see a fair amount of warm air being drawn into the area, even though our dew points are still rather high. But look at this. What kind of happens is we begin to draw those higher dew points further off to the west into Montana. And I think that's really probably where the better storms, or the better chance for storms, will be going into the weekend. And so you can see here going into Saturday evening, really not much, maybe something into Montana and parts of Canada, but it's really not until perhaps a late Saturday night when we get maybe a few storms along the Canadian border here, along the Canadian North Dakota border. And again, some of that's aided in the fact that we're going to have another low-level jet kind of set up in through here. And so that's really on the nose of that jet. Again, that's where these storms like to develop, and that's where this model is showing it, right along the border. And so we're looking at least the chance of storms popping up through the overnight hours Saturday and pushing kind of eastward just a little bit as we go into the nighttime hours, or spreading eastward as we get to Saturday night and into early Sunday morning. Now, as we get into Sunday morning around that 6-7 a.m. time frame, notice that northern part of that low-level jet really begins to wind down, and we're just maybe left with a little bit kind of right there. But we've got a nose of the jet kind of winds down into more so South Dakota as we get into those early morning hours on Sunday. Now, notice right on that nose, what's left of that jet is kind of where some of those storms could be, kind of in the northwest angle area of Minnesota. But notice we're not looking at any storms developing down into South Dakota. We still have a nice big ridge down there, a nice solid ridge, but man, we're so warm across our region. In fact, we're going to be looking at very likely a record high low temperatures going into Sunday morning, probably even going into Saturday morning as well. And we'll take a look at that. We'll talk more about that in just a little bit. But for the remainder of Sunday, I mean, look at this, guys. We continue to have just high humidities, dew points possibly into the 60s, high Cape values reaching into the 2000s. That's really good for Cape values. We even got some decent low-level winds kind of nudging into the area, but we remain under this big dome of this big ridge over us, that death ridge that just hampers any type of development. It's so very strong. We got so much warm air still within the area, 10, 11 degrees Celsius. And so ultimately we're just not expected much in the way of precipitation going into Sunday. I mean, maybe a little bit across the north is about the only area that I can maybe foresee something developing going into late Sunday, but ultimately it's looking too warm. Now by Monday morning, things begin to shift just a little bit. We begin to break down this ridge. We've got this low that's sitting and spinning out across the Rockies. Starts to be pushed just a little bit further to the east. We've got this nose of that mid-level jet begins to push into western parts of our region. We have some cooler temperatures that begin to move their way eastward in those mid-levels. So we're not looking at that 10, 11 degrees Celsius. Now we're looking at 5, 6, which is really much better. We continue to have some decent dew points in the 50s still across western parts of North Dakota going into Monday morning. So we're looking at the possibility at least of maybe some storms developing across the western Dakotas, particularly across western North Dakota going into Monday morning, and then maybe a few scattered showers or maybe some thunderstorms going into the afternoon. And then by Monday evening, maybe a few more showers and storms across northern parts of North Dakota, with perhaps a few storms beginning to develop across South Dakota as well. And by Monday evening, that trough really begins to flatten out. That ridge that's been sitting over our area, those cooler temperatures begin to push just a little bit further east as well. As we get into Monday evening, we still continue to have some higher dew points across the region. And so, like I said, we're still going to be looking at least the possibility of some showers and storms going into Monday evening. And then as we get to kind of closer to that midnight time frame, look for at least some spotty showers, maybe some isolated thunderstorms across the central and western parts of South Dakota, or central and western parts of the Dakotas Monday night around midnight and early Tuesday morning. And then as we get into early Tuesday morning, you could see even more so that trough pushing just a little bit further east, having a little more of an influence on us. And so that really begins to kick this surface low off to the east. We're going to have some thunderstorms developing possibly across Minnesota going into Tuesday, as we have one little last kick of this storm as it begins to move on out. And just how warm will it be? Well, we're just going to kind of quickly step through some of the high and low temperatures expected by the National Weather Service. As we're looking at our high temperatures for Thursday, we're looking at the 60s up in the Arrowhead region. But look at this, we got the 80s down across the southeastern parts of South Dakota. Otherwise, generally 60s and 70s. As we're looking at those low temperatures going into Thursday morning, we're going to be mainly in the 50s. Now for Friday morning, lows are going to be in the 40s to the northwest. Man, look at this, low to maybe even mid 60 down in the southeastern parts of South Dakota. Our high temperatures for Friday, again, looking at the mid to upper 80s down here in the south, mid 60s up in the north, really rather comfortable up there. As we get into Saturday morning, here's where we kind of start to see a few more of those records that are going to be broken, those record high minimum temperatures. I mean, look at this, low temperatures For Saturday morning, we're talking upper 60s to near 70 for some of these areas down across the south. Then as we get further to the north, of course, we're talking in the low to mid 50s for low temperatures. Saturday for highs, we're looking at the low to mid 80s down in the south, with those temperatures, those high temperatures up in the north in the upper 60s to low 70s. Again, really, really nice day in store for Saturday. For Sunday morning, again, where we're going to be looking at the possibility of breaking some records, going in for some low temperatures, some high low temperatures, if that makes sense. Once again, those temps in the mornings going to be well into the mid to upper 60s for those across eastern South Dakota, much of Minnesota. And then as we get kind of west and northwest, we're looking at those lows going to be in the upper 40s to around 50. High temperatures for Sunday, we're looking upper 80s to maybe near 90 again across southern areas of Minnesota, southeast South Dakota. As you get further to the north and west, we're looking at those highs in the mid 60s. Monday morning lows still actually looking fairly warm, obviously, as we still have mid to upper 60s for those morning temperatures going into Monday morning, mid 40s off to the north and west. Monday's highs still looking really nice, obviously down in those same areas, low to mid 80s, upper 60s to maybe some mid 60s further to the north and west. Then beginning by Tuesday and kind of sliding into the remainder of the week, things kind of cool down or become a little more seasonable perhaps, as we're looking at those high temperatures finally across the south, more so in the 70s with the 60s across the north. Take a look at this, folks. These are going to be some areas that are going to be at or going to be close or breaking those overnight low temperatures. On the warm side, they're going to be warmer than they've ever been for overnight lows. And so for some of you, like we're looking up in International Falls on Friday morning, 56 degrees, and the old record was 52 degrees for an overnight low or for a morning low. Saturday morning lows, we're looking at 60 degrees. That's going to be tying a record back in 2021 for St. Cloud. Looks like down near Rochester-ish, we're going to be close at 65. The old record was 66. Sunday morning, a bunch more records going to be at or going to be broken, at least, as you can see. Fargo, Grand Forks, Aberdeen, Mobridge, St. Cloud, St. Paul. A lot of these areas are going to be very warm to start off the day Sunday morning, and then again, even going into Monday, plenty of those records still going to be at or going to be broken as we start the day on Monday. Again, Fargo, Bismarck, Mobridge, Watertown, Brainerd, Duluth, Rochester, a lot of these areas looking to be very warm to start off the day on Monday. All right, one last thing I want to show you now. We've got this low pressure system, obviously, that's coming off into the west coast here, going into the weekend. It sits and kind of dumbbells around. Now, eventually, this guy is going to begin to pull off and move eastward and bring with it just a little bit cooler air with it. Now, notice off in the Canadian provinces up here in the far northwest, we've got another system that pulls off the Pacific coast and begins to push eastward and brings just a little bit cooler weather back behind it. And yet quickly on its heels, perhaps, might be yet another system that pulls in and begins to draw down just a little bit more colder air on the backside of this. Now, we're looking at next weekend. We're looking as we get into October 6th and 7th next weekend, when this possible change is going to be taking place from all this warm air that we're expecting this weekend into more seasonable fall-like weather going into next weekend. In fact, if we put the surface map into motion, just kind of keep an eye on the purples and blues out in the west and how those eventually develop and begin to push and sag just a little bit further south as we get into that next week time frame, that another low perhaps may push out and some snow kind of pushes a little bit further south, a little bit further east. Will it happen? For sure. What exactly? Well, that's obviously, that needs to be determined, but generally what we're taking out of this is it does look like we're looking at a pattern shift after this week going into next weekend, where we're looking at a little more of those fall type of temperatures. So yes, we're going to be having some above average temperatures going into the weekend. but enjoy them because there's that possibility that we're going to be seeing those cooler temperatures moving into our area. Big surprise, right? Here we are in the North Country. Eventually it's got to get to us. I mean, we are getting into October after all already. That's crazy that we're already at that point, but nevertheless, let's enjoy these warm temperatures before the next season begins to drop back in. All right, everybody. For Region Weather Live, I'm meteorologist Brad Warner, and everybody have a good day.